November 3, 1943. A Gestapo interrogation room in occupied France. The concrete walls were slick with moisture, and the single bulb overhead swayed slightly, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. A young woman sat bound to a wooden chair, her wrists raw from the rope, her face marked by exhaustion but not yet broken. The interrogator circled slowly, his boots clicking against the floor with mechanical precision. Outside, the autumn rain hammered against blacked-out windows, drowning the sounds that no one was meant to hear. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary story of courage, deception, and survival, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We bring you the untold stories of World War II that history books often overlook. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from, whether you're in London, New York, Sydney, or anywhere else in the world. Your support helps us continue bringing these remarkable stories to light. The woman gave nothing away, not her network, not her contacts, not even her real name. For 3 days they had tried everything: threats, deprivation, psychological warfare designed to break the strongest minds. They showed her forged newspapers claiming Allied defeats. They played recordings of screams from adjacent cells. They told her she'd been abandoned, forgotten, that no one was coming. And still, she remained silent. Her interrogators believed she was just another resistance operative. Another small fish in an endless ocean of spies and saboteurs flooding occupied Europe. They had no idea who she actually was. And then, in a routine search of her belongings, they found a photograph. A family portrait, creased and faded, hidden in the lining of her coat. The face of the older man in the image was unmistakable, known to every German intelligence officer from Paris to Berlin. In that single moment, everything changed. The woman in the chair wasn't just another agent. She was the daughter of the man orchestrating Britain's entire war effort. She was Winston Churchill's child. To understand how a British woman of such extraordinary lineage ended up in a Gestapo cell, we must first understand the invisible war being fought in the shadows of occupied Europe. By late 1943, the tide of World War II was shifting, though victory remained far from certain. The Allies had landed in Italy, and the Soviet Union was grinding German forces down in brutal eastern campaigns. But in France, the real battle wasn't being fought with tanks or bombers. It was being fought with radios, false identities, and coded messages transmitted in the dead of night. The Special Operations Executive, Britain's covert warfare organization, had been dropping agents into France since 1940. Their mission was simple in concept but lethal in execution: sabotage German operations, coordinate resistance networks, and prepare the groundwork for an eventual Allied invasion. These agents were trained in everything from silent killing to wireless telegraphy, from lockpicking to withstanding interrogation. They carried cyanide pills in case capture became inevitable. The life expectancy of an SOE wireless operator in occupied France was approximately 6 weeks. Women comprised nearly 40% of SOE's F-section agents in France. This wasn't progressive politics, it was cold strategic calculation. Women could move more freely through checkpoints, aroused less suspicion when carrying parcels or meeting in cafes, and were considered less threatening by German patrols who'd been conditioned to see warfare as a masculine domain. The Nazis paid for that assumption with blown supply lines, destroyed communications networks, and an underground resistance that seemed to operate with impossible coordination. But sending anyone into occupied France was a calculated risk. Sending someone with a recognizable bloodline was something else entirely. The daughter of Britain's prime minister working as an undercover agent wasn't just dangerous, it was a potential propaganda catastrophe if captured. If the Gestapo got their hands on Winston Churchill's child, they wouldn't just have an intelligence asset. They'd have a bargaining chip, a propaganda weapon, and living proof that Britain's leaders were willing to sacrifice their own families in a war many Germans still believed could be negotiated to a settlement. Yet that's exactly what happened, because the woman sitting in that interrogation room, exhausted, hurting, but unbroken, was Mary Churchill. It's not Winston's eldest daughter, but one carefully trained, deliberately placed, and now catastrophically exposed. The photograph changed everything instantly. Within an hour, the local Gestapo commander was on a secure line to Paris. Within 3 hours, SS intelligence in Berlin had been notified. And within 6 hours, the interrogation protocols shifted from routine extraction to something far more calculated. They stopped trying to break her. Instead, they began trying to use her. The next interrogator who entered the room was different. No shouting, no threats. He carried a folder thick with papers and sat across from her with the casual confidence of someone holding every card. He opened the folder slowly, deliberately, and slid a document across the table. It was a decoded British transmission, dated 2 weeks prior, referencing an agent with her cover name. He didn't ask questions. He simply let her read it, let her see that her network was compromised, that the Gestapo had been watching her for longer than she realized. Then he showed her the photograph again. Her family, her father. And he spoke in perfect English, his accent refined, almost Oxford-like. He told her they knew everything now. Her real identity, her training, the networks she'd contacted. He said her father had been informed of her capture through diplomatic back channels. And he claimed, whether truthfully or not, that Churchill had authorized negotiations for her release. The psychological warfare was exquisite in its cruelty. Every word was designed not to extract information, but to isolate her emotionally. To make her believe she was a liability to her own cause, that her father, the man leading Britain through its darkest hour, was now forced to weigh her life against strategic priorities, that she had become exactly what she'd feared most when she volunteered a burden to the war effort rather than an asset. But the Germans faced a problem. If they executed her, they lost their leverage. They paraded her publicly. They risked turning her into a martyr and enraging British resolve. And if they held her indefinitely, they had to maintain operational security around a prisoner whose identity, if leaked, could trigger rescue operations or reprisals they couldn't afford. The value of their captive was matched only by the complexity of keeping her. What Mary Churchill didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that her capture had indeed been reported to London. And the response from British intelligence was colder than anything her interrogators had said. The official position was simple: she didn't exist. No daughter of Winston Churchill was operating in France. If the Germans claimed otherwise, it was propaganda. If they produced evidence, it was fabricated. And if they attempted negotiations, Britain would refuse on principle, treating the claim as an obvious psychological operation. This was the brutal calculus of total war. Acknowledging her identity would confirm intelligence failures, expose SO operations, and give the Germans exactly the propaganda victory they sought. Denying it protected the broader mission, even if it meant abandoning her to whatever fate her captors decided. In the archives, there's a single-line notation in an SOE file from November 1943. Asset compromised. Status denied. No action authorized. Back in the cell, Mary was moved to a different facility. Cleaner, quieter. The physical torture stopped. Replaced by something more insidious. Isolation punctuated by carefully staged kindness. She was given better food, medical attention for her injuries, even access to Red Cross parcels that may or may not have been genuine. Her interrogators shifted tactics entirely. Now they wanted information. Yes, but they also wanted cooperation. A statement, a radio broadcast, something that could be used to fracture British morale or sow doubt about Churchill's leadership. She refused. Every single time. Because she understood something her captors didn't fully grasp. Her value wasn't in her last name. It was in her silence. The moment she gave them anything, a name, a location, even a propaganda statement made under duress, she would validate their tactics and endanger everyone she'd worked with. So she endured. Days became weeks. Weeks stretched toward a month. And still, she told them nothing. What the Gestapo also didn't know was that Mary Churchill's capture had triggered a quiet, desperate series of operations in London. Not official rescue attempts, those would be too visible, too risky. But intelligence officers began working through neutral intermediaries, back-channel contacts in Switzerland and Sweden. Anyone who might have leverage or access to German intelligence circles. Feelers were sent out about potential exchanges. Names of captured German officers were quietly compiled. And in the deepest vaults of British intelligence, contingency plans were drafted for scenarios no one wanted to speak aloud. The Germans, meanwhile, faced increasing pressure from Berlin to produce results. Holding Churchill's daughter was only valuable if they could leverage it. Months of captivity without actionable intelligence or propaganda victories made her an expensive liability. Resources were being diverted to secure her detention. Questions were being asked by higher command about why such a valuable prisoner had yielded so little. Then, in late January 1944, something shifted. A German intelligence officer in Stockholm made contact with a British counterpart. The conversation was indirect, hypothetical, carefully phrased to maintain deniability. But the message was clear. There might be a possibility. An exchange. 3 captured SS officers, all holding valuable intelligence in return for one British agent whose identity the Germans claimed was significant. The British response was calculated. They didn't confirm the prisoner's identity. But they didn't deny interest in the exchange either. Negotiations dragged on for weeks, conducted through intermediaries, each side probing for advantage. The Germans wanted confirmation that they held who they thought they held. The British wanted assurance the prisoner was alive and would be released unharmed. Neither side would fully commit. In her cell, Mary knew none of this. She only knew that suddenly, her treatment improved marginally. The interrogations stopped. She was allowed to bathe, given clean clothes, moved to a cell with a window. Her guards, while still watchful, were no longer openly hostile. Something had changed in the calculus of her captivity, though she didn't know what. The truth was, both sides were locked in a deadly game of chess where every move carried catastrophic risk. If the exchange went forward and the prisoner wasn't who the Germans claimed, Berlin would see it as a failure of intelligence and a waste of valuable German officers. The British participated, and she was Churchill's daughter. They'd confirm years of denials and expose operational security failures. And if either side double-crossed the other, any future exchanges or negotiations would become impossible. February 12, 1944. A snow-covered field on the French-Swiss border. Technically neutral ground, but practically no man's land. 2 vehicles approached from opposite directions, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. German and British officers stood 20 meters apart, weapons ready but not raised. Both sides acutely aware that this moment balanced on a knife's edge of mutual distrust. The German vehicle doors opened first. 3 SS officers, gaunt from imprisonment but standing upright, walked slowly toward the center point. Then the British vehicle opened. A woman emerged, wrapped in an oversized coat, her face partially obscured by a wool cap. She moved carefully, as though testing whether this was real or another psychological operation. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. Both sides were looking for signs of treachery, hidden weapons, unexpected reinforcements, anything that would turn a negotiated exchange into an ambush. The snow fell softly, muffling sound, creating an almost surreal quiet. Then, simultaneously, the prisoners began walking. Slow steps, measured, the Germans toward their vehicle, the woman toward the British officers. Halfway across, she stumbled slightly. A British officer started forward instinctively, then stopped himself. Any sudden movement could collapse the entire exchange. She steadied herself and continued. 20 meters, 15. 10. The German officers were nearly to their vehicle now. 5 meters. And then hands reached out. British hands pulling her the final steps into their protection. The vehicles departed in opposite directions within seconds. No words exchanged, no confirmation of identities. Just a silent acknowledgement that both sides had gotten what they needed, or what they were willing to trade. The woman was loaded into the British vehicle, which sped toward Geneva, then to an airfield, then to Britain. The entire extraction took less than 6 hours from border crossing to British soil. Only once they were airborne did the officer accompanying her speak. He asked her name, her real name. And she answered, quietly, her voice hoarse from months of careful silence. Mary Churchill, service number classified. So, F section. The officer nodded and handed her a thermos of tea. There were no celebrations, no relief visible on anyone's face. Because everyone in that aircraft understood that what had just happened couldn't be publicly acknowledged, ever. Her months in captivity would be erased from official records. Her family would be told she'd been on assignment in Scotland. The exchange would be classified at the highest levels. And she would be debriefed, relocated, and asked to never speak of what she'd endured. The official story, released through carefully managed channels, was that 3 German officers had been exchanged for British personnel held in occupied France. No names were given. No details provided. It was reported as routine, unremarkable, one of hundreds of such negotiations conducted through neutral intermediaries throughout the war. The photograph that had exposed Mary's identity was buried in Gestapo files, later destroyed during Allied bombing raids or deliberately purged as Germany's defeat became inevitable. But in intelligence circles, the truth circulated quietly. So operatives heard whispered accounts of an agent who'd survived months of Gestapo interrogation without breaking. German intelligence officers, in the desperate final months of the war, spoke of the prisoner who'd cost them 3 valuable officers and produced nothing of strategic value. And in the Churchill family, there were conversations that never appeared in memoirs or official biographies, quiet acknowledgments of what had been risked and what had been endured. Mary Churchill never spoke publicly about her capture. After the war, she lived quietly, working in diplomatic circles, always deflecting questions about her wartime service with polite vagueness. The records of her deployment remained classified for decades, released only in heavily redacted form long after her death. The photograph that exposed her identity was never found in any archive, and the interrogators who questioned her disappeared into the chaos of Germany's collapse, their reports lost or destroyed. What remains is a story of extraordinary courage wrapped in layers of deliberate obscurity. A young woman who volunteered for lethal service despite her family name making her a catastrophic security risk. Intelligence officers who calculated that silence and denial served the war effort better than rescue operations. And an exchange conducted in a snowy field that both sides needed, but neither would acknowledge. In the final analysis, Mary Churchill's capture and survival illustrated the brutal mathematics of total war. Personal sacrifice, even at the highest levels of leadership, was expected and sometimes required. Strategic priorities outweighed individual lives, regardless of whose daughter you were. And survival often meant accepting that your service would never be publicly recognized. Your suffering never officially acknowledged. She had endured torture, isolation, and psychological warfare designed by some of the most efficient interrogators in human history. She had stared down the machinery of Nazi intelligence and given them nothing. And in the end, she walked out of captivity into an airplane that carried her home to a nation that would never officially admit she'd been gone. The rain still falls on that field near the French-Swiss border. The snow still covers the ground each winter, erasing footprints and memories. And somewhere in the remaining classified files of World War II, there's a single-line notation about an SO operative whose name has been redacted, whose service remains denied, and whose courage speaks louder than any official recognition ever could. They tortured her for days, trying to break her will and extract her secrets. But they didn't realize that the moment they discovered her identity, they'd already lost. Because Mary Churchill had learned, long before her capture, that some silences are more powerful than any words, and that true strength isn't measured by what you say, but by what you refuse to give away, no matter the cost.